What is your name?
Tom Davey.
Can you spell it for me?
Last name Davey.
What is your date of birth?
March 21, 1933.
Where were you born?
Where?
Where?
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Okay. How old were you during the attacks?
About 8 3/4 years old, so I rounded off to 9 when I talk to people.
Okay. What is your mother and father's name?
My mother is Catherine, and father is Thomas Davey.
Was your father in the military?
Yes.
What did he do?
He was a Navy lieutenant, and when we were in Hawaii, he was in charge of the airfield at Fort Island, airfield, the hangars, public works, particularly. So.
Okay. Did your mother work?
No.
She was a housewife.
Yes. Yes.
How many siblings do you have? How many siblings?
2 brothers, Jim and Jack.
Okay.
Jim is 2 years younger than me, and Jack is 4 years younger. I did have a sister. She passed away on our way from South Carolina to San Diego in 1937. She passed away. Causes unknown other than suffocation in a motel room.
Okay. Where did you go to school when you lived in Hawaii?
Kenneth Whiting School. It was a grammar school on Fort Island.
Okay. Where was your home on Fort Island?
It was quarters Q up in the officer section. It would be the southeast corner of Fort Island, right next to Battleship Row.
Who all lived with you when you lived in Hawaii?
Besides my family, mother, father, and the 3 of us boys, my grandmother on my mother's side.
Okay. Do you remember what your house looked like?
Yeah.
Can you tell me what it looked like?
Well, it's a one floor. It was built in 1936. 1 floor, no cellar type home. There's probably a name for that type. I don't know what it is, but it was above ground. I mean, it was an above ground home. There was no connection to the ground other than.
Do you remember if it was on stilts?
No.
Okay.
It was. I remember it was not on stilts.
Okay.
It's sort of like rested on the ground, so
Okay.
to speak.
What were you doing on December 7th, 1941?
At that particular time was a Sunday morning, so my middle brother and I were in our bedroom, and we were, I don't know, playing around, doing something. And that's when I remember hearing noises that were not familiar for that type of day, or in particular on Sunday. You never had, the airplanes that were flying. Heard the airplanes first, very low. And my mother was in the kitchen getting breakfast ready for us before we went to church. And my father was still in bed, probably due to we went to the football game on Saturday over in Honolulu, and they probably had a party or something like that. But anyway, he was in bed. So that's the status at time 0, if you will.
Okay. What did you guys do once you guys knew that? What did you and your family do once you realized the island was under attack?
Well, when I heard the noises, I ran outside, and I guess my brother did too. He, right after I did, ran out in the backyard. I think I still had pajamas on. And that's when I saw these low-flying planes come right over the house. And that was definitely unusual. I mean, not even the Navy when they practice attacking the fleet like that, They never flew that low over the houses. And then we started hearing explosions, and then knew that something was really wrong. My mother said, I came running into the house and into the kitchen and told her to wake Daddy up. Those looked like Japanese planes. And I ran back out again. And so we watched a couple of torpedo planes come flying. At the time, didn't know they were torpedo planes. But anyway, there's low-flying planes, and they were torpedo planes that they were so low because when they dropped their torpedoes on the ships right in front of our house there, they had to fly low. And so once they dropped them, the torpedoes, they had to immediately start gaining altitude and tipping their wings so they wouldn't hit the masts that are on the ships over there. Those type of battleships all had these tall towers, and so when they came over my backyard, they were left wing down and very low, and I remember seeing one of the Japanese, it was in a pilot position, give sort of like a hand signal, like you can interpret it as a wave or something. But I could see his face as plain as day. And then another one came by, and my brother saw that one, and I did too, where the guy basically did about the same thing. So he was right after that. Then now the noise, the crescendo of noise increased. That gun started shooting because, the Americans were really caught flat-footed. So the return fire didn't come immediately. It came after several minutes. And so that noise, with the airplane noise, with the explosions, then it got scary. And my father at that time then had come out of the house, and he grabbed my brother. I think he grabbed him by the arm or something, and he yelled at me to get into the house. So I ran in the back door, same door I went out, and that's when there's a tremendous explosion. At the time, we didn't know it was the Arizona, but it shook the house. It cracked some of the windows in the house. It knocked some china out of the china cabinet that my mother had in the living room, in the dining room, sorry. And it was like probably what an earthquake might feel like. And so anyway, we all went, or my father had us go to my grandmother's room, which is right across the little hallway from my room. And he said, lay down on the floor. So we laid down on the floor, all of us, and he went into the different bedrooms and grabbed mattresses out and dragged them in, put them on top of us. And he says, you guys stay under there until I tell you otherwise, So for the rest of that first attack, we were under the mattresses, so I didn't really see anything. Heard a lot of noise. And then there was a lull. And at that time, we didn't know there was going to be a second attack, but we couldn't be sure. And there was a lull. That's when my father said, okay, into the car, And we all went out, got into the car. And he drove us to the Admiral's house, quarters K. And underneath there are two old 5-inch gun turrets that were built around World War I time. The guns were not in there. So they served as a perfect air raid shelter. And of course, air raid shelter and all that is new terms. We never heard those terms before. So anyway, I know a lot of us kids ended up in one of the turrets. And my mother was put to work. She was lighting cigarettes for some of the sailors. The hallway, I remember going into the hallway to get into the turret, and that's where I first saw these guys, all oily, and some were bleeding. And it was sort of it was a curiosity thing. Now it turns into an emotional thing because now I know what it was. So anyway, that's what that experience to me was. But then my mother, she told us this afterwards. She was lighting cigarettes for some of the sailors that were leaning up against the hall, and she lit and put them in their mouth. And then every now and then, she said we'd go down the line again, and if we saw one of the sailors had died, we took this. If the cigarette was still stuck in his mouth, pull it out. So anyway, the second attack's going on, so we got up on a ledge in the turrets, and you could look out the gun slots and see the action out in the harbor, and got a good view of what was going on then. And while we were in there, I don't know how long, but someone came into the shelter and started handing out oranges to us kids, and said very clearly, make sure you don't waste any of this orange, and don't eat it all at once, because you don't know when you're going to eat again. And so that was that. And basically that sort of was all day long. We were there until the afternoon, and then we had to move. We moved over to the back part of the island, only about a half a mile away, to the new bachelor's officers' quarters. And their families that lived up in that officers' quarters area were put into the rooms where the single officers lived, and it was like, something like 2 families per room. So I know I ended up sleeping on the floor and stuff like that, And that night of December 7th, they had tables out in this hall, and the hall was a real shiny linoleum, I think, and big mahogany type tables out there against the walls on both sides of the hallway. And all of a sudden shooting started, and I don't know what time of night it was, probably about 8 or 9 o'clock, and Americans were shooting like crazy. And so, but we didn't know it was the Americans shooting. We thought it was the Japanese attacking at night. So we ended up having to go out into the hallway and get under the tables. That's what we were instructed to, if anything happened, to go out in the hallway and get under the tables. And you could sit in the hallway, and as these guns were firing, you could see the flash, glance off the floors, and it was like bright lights going down the hallway and all that stuff. It was pretty crazy. And so that went on for maybe a half hour or so, and then it stopped. And it turned out later on that it was the Americans shot down a flight of our own aircraft coming in from the Enterprise that were coming into land at Fort Island, despite orders not to shoot any incoming aircraft unless ordered. And someone pulled the trigger, and it only took one shot, and all hell broke loose. So that's how that ended up. And then the next day, and the next day, and probably for at least 3 days, kids my age and older, were out in the front lawn, the side lawn of the BOQ over there, the new BOQ, and we were put to work loading machine gun bolts into machine gun belts for the Army and the Marines, And so I was like, I think for one period of time, I was in charge of the tracers, putting the one that had a painted tip on it every 5th round. And then I ended up on the belt line. That's, again, myself, I think, give someone else a chance to do the tracers. So we did that, and my father said, he wrote this in a letter to me, probably in the 50s. He says, I remember driving up the driveway the next day and saw you kids doing that, loading the machine gun belts. He said he broke down and cried.
they're thrust into this now, you know? So anyway, that was it. And I remember the thing, one of the views that stood out in my mind more than anything else. Well, the Utah was out front of right in front of our barracks, the barracks that we were staying in, the officers' quarters. The Utah was tipped over, so that had capsized. That was a sad scene, but was seeing this big black plume of smoke in the background. It came up, and then the wind took it, and it blowed in a steady stream toward the west, and it was Arizona smoking. 3 days. That was sad. And then after that, I'm not sure what happened. I mean, you know, we ended up having to move. Things were packed up in boxes and stuff like that. We couldn't go back to our quarters, or if we did, only for a short period of time, and get ready to move out. They're going to evacuate all civilians, but they couldn't do that until they got a convoy put together. See, now you couldn't go back from California to Hawaii, or Hawaii to California by single or twos. You had to have a convoy now because of the Japanese submarine threat. And so we had to wait. It actually turned out to be in May before we ended up going in a convoy.